The year is 1775, and life in England and France seems paradoxically the best and the worst that it can be. The rulers and ruling classes of both countries may have the best of life, but they are out of touch with the common people and believe that the status quo will continue forever. In France, inflation is out of control and an oppressive social system results in intolerable and extreme injustices being committed against average citizens, who believe they have the worst of life. The breaking point riotous rebellion is near, and the populace of France secretly but steadily moves toward revolution. Meanwhile, in England, people give spiritualists and the supernatural more attention than the revolutionary rumblings from American colonists, and an ineffective justice system leads to widespread violence and crime. While the English and French kings and queens carelessly ignore the unrest and misery prevalent in their countries, silent forces guide the rulers and their people toward fate and death. This first chapter presents the sweeping backdrop of forces and events that will shape the lives of the novel's characters. From the first paragraph, Dickens begins developing the central theme of duality. His pairings of contrasting concepts such as the best and worst of times, light and darkness, and hope and despair reflect the mirror images of good and evil that will recur in characters and situations throughout the novel. For example, both the English and French monarchs George III and Louis XVI, respectively, seem indifferent to the plight of their people and cannot comprehend any power being great enough to eclipse their divine right to rule. However, while their attitudes will result in revolutions for both countries, the American Revolution occurs an ocean away, leaving the British infrastructure unscathed and saving the British population from the massive loss of life and the horrors that will take place during the French Revolution. The differences between the two countries become more pronounced when Dickens compares the concepts of spirituality and justice in each country. In England, people are enthralled with the supernatural, especially with visionaries and ghosts that communicate mystical messages. In France, though, people pay attention to religious leaders out of fear rather than fascination. A man neglecting to kneel to a distant procession of monks may be condemned to a tortuous death for his transgression. Dickens contrasts France's harsh justice system to England's lax one. Criminals overrun England, highwaymen rob seemingly at will, prisoners revolt against their jailers, and violence is answered with more violence. When the courts serve justice in England, they serve it indiscriminately, with murderers and petty thieves alike receiving the death penalty. In England, the Dover mail coach makes its way up a hill one late November night. The foreboding atmosphere of night and mist makes everyone uneasy. The passengers, the coachman, and the guard. Highway robberies are common, and the travelers are as wary of each other as they are of anyone else they might meet on the road. As the coach reaches the top of the hill, the travelers hear a horse approaching at a gallop. The rider, Jerry, is a messenger from Tellson's Bank in London, and he has a message for one of the passengers, Mr. Jarvis Lorry, an employee of the bank. Mr. Lorry reads the message, which states, "Wait at Dover for Mizell, Mr." Lorry tells Jerry to return the answer, recalled to life, and the coach continues on its way. As Jerry gallops back to London, he muses over Mr. Lorry's mysterious response. Like many 19th century authors, Dickens uses atmosphere and setting to establish the mood of a story, and this chapter exemplifies his mastery of the technique. The action of the novel begins with discomfort and anxiety as the characters slog along the muddy highway in the dark, damp chill of a late November mist. The threat of highway robbery that Dickens describes in the first chapter combines with the misty cold to create a sense of vulnerability and awe. Mr. Lorry serves as a figurative and actual link between France and England throughout the book. As Dickens reveals in later chapters, Mr. Lorry is first and foremost a man of business, and his business Tellson's Bank carries him between England and France. At this point, though, his current business is a mystery to everyone but himself. The messages exchanged between him and Jerry are a puzzle to all that hear them, especially Mr. Lorry's response, recalled to life. This theme of mystery and secrecy will recur repeatedly and will play a central role in the unfolding of the plot. As the coach rattles its way toward Dover, Mr. Lorry dozes restlessly, reflecting upon his mission to dig someone out of a grave who has been buried alive for 18 years. He envisions what the face of the man must look like, and contemplates how severely the years may have affected him. Haunted by visions of the man's face, Mr. Lorry imagines a dialogue in which he repeatedly asks the man, "I hope you care to live?" And the man always responds, "I can't say." Continuing the theme of secrecy, Dickens compares Mr. Lorry's secret to the inner lives of all people, stating that every person is a profound secret and mystery to every other. Dickens uses the passengers in the coach to demonstrate his point. Although the three men are traveling a long distance together in very close quarters, they act solitary enough to be traveling alone. Additionally, as described in Chapter 2, the passengers are so bundled up against the cold that distinguishing any of their features is impossible. Their physical anonymity, combined with their mistrust of each other due to the prevalence of robberies, causes the three passengers to completely isolate themselves from one another. This concept of mystery and isolation becomes increasingly important as the book progresses and characters begin to make decisions based upon close-kept secrets. Also important in this chapter is the introduction of the resurrection theme. Someone is indeed going to be recalled to life, and the questions raised by such an event haunt Mr. Lorry. Recalled to Life is also the title of book I Have a Tale of Two Cities, which indicates that the upcoming resurrection is vital to the development of the plot in this section of the novel. Although you still don't know who the dead man is or from where he is being resurrected, you do know that he is somehow central to the plot. Dickens symbolically represents the significance of the resurrection at the end of the chapter, when Mr. Lorry awakens at daybreak and looks out the coach window at a partially plowed field, a wood, and the sun rising into the clear sky. His troubled dreams have been dissolved by the sunrise. A rebirth or resurrection of the sun, and the sun rises to illuminate a field and a wood, the provinces of Death the farmer and Fate the woodman that Dickens introduced in the first chapter. With this imagery, Dickens suggests that recalling the mystery man to life will also bring to light the silent forces that are moving France toward revolution. Mr. Lorry arrives at the Royal George Hotel in Dover in the late morning. After freshening up, he spends the day relaxing and meditating on his mission while he waits for the young woman, Lucy Manette, to arrive. When Lucy arrives, Mr. Lorry introduces himself and proceeds to divulge the nature of her involvement in his current business in Paris. Apparently, Lucy's father, Dr. Alexander Manette, whom she believed to be dead, is alive and has been secretly imprisoned in Paris for the past 18 years. The French authorities have recently released Dr. Manette, and Tellson's bank is sending Mr. Lorry to identify the doctor who was one of Tellson's clients and bring him to the safety of England. As the doctor's daughter, Lucy will be responsible for caring for him and nursing him back to health. The story shocks Lucy. When Mr. Lorry tries to comfort her, she simply stares at him, gripping his arm. Concerned by her numbed state, Mr. Lorry calls for help. A large red-haired woman runs into the room, shoves Mr. Lorry away from Lucy and into a wall, and begins yelling at the inn servants to bring smelling salts and cold water. As Mr. Lorry emerges from his room at the Royal George, the curious servants hover nearby to see what he looks like after shedding his bulky winter coat and hat. Similarly, Dickens readers also wait for Dickens to reveal Mr. Lorry and his secret. Dickens fills in the physical details of Mr. Lorry's person. He is signifying that the details of Mr. Lorry's character and his mission will also soon be revealed. What you discover is that, although Mr. Lorry insists that he is simply a man of business with no more feelings than a machine, he is actually a kind man who is deeply troubled by the Manette situation. His concern is apparent in his dreams about digging out Dr. Manette and in the gentle way in which he discloses to Lucy that her father is alive. He initially presents her father's story as the story of an anonymous customer to give her time to adjust to the shocking news. Notice, however, that although Mr. Lorry's mission is no longer a secret, the resolution to one mystery leads to another. Why was Dr. Manette secretly imprisoned? Notice, however, that although Mr. Lorry's mission is no longer a secret, the resolution to one mystery leads to another. Why was Dr. Manette secretly imprisoned? Left behind, however, are the stains of the red wine on the street and the people's hands, faces, and feet, foreshadowing the blood that will be spilled there in later years. Inside the wine shop, Monsieur and Madame Defarge converse with three other men, all called Jacques. Monsieur Defarge sends the men upstairs, to a chamber on the 5th floor. Meanwhile, Mr. Lorry and Lucy have entered the shop, and after a brief discussion with Monsieur Defarge, they follow him upstairs to the 5th floor chamber, where the three Jacques are peering inside through holes in the wall. Monsieur Defarge unlocks the door, and he, Mr. Lorry, and Lucy enter the room. Inside the darkened room, they see a white-haired man sitting on a bench making shoes. Dickens leaves no doubt that the crowd scene in front of the wine shop is a glimpse of things to come. The wine soaking into the street and smearing people's faces and hands represents the blood that the people will shed during the violence of the Revolution. To reinforce that imagery, Dickens goes so far as to have one of the men in the crowd dip his finger in the muddy wine and write blood on a wall. As Dickens predicts future violence, he also hints at how hunger, want, and anger will transform decent, caring human beings into unthinking, bloodthirsty animals. He describes some of the wine drinkers as having a tigerish smear about the mouth, and the residents of Saint Antoine have a hunted air and harbor a wild beast thought of the possibility of turning at bay. The image of the tiger will appear again later in the book, as will the vision of an oppressed people losing their humanity in their anger and quest for revenge. This chapter also introduces Monsieur and Madame Defarge, characters that Dickens uses to embody the ideas and emotions of the Revolution. Monsieur Defarge is a man of authority, as shown when he reprimands Gaspard for writing blood on the wall and in his conversation with the three jocks. Although Dickens describes Monsieur Defarge as good-humored looking, and Monsieur Defarge demonstrates kindness and loyalty to Dr. Manette, when considering the injustice of the doctor's imprisonment, Monsieur Defarge becomes a secret, angry, dangerous man. In the subdued atmosphere of the wine shop, Monsieur Defarge's air of authority and resolution are exceeded only by that of his wife. Although she doesn't say much, Madame Defarge communicates secretively with her husband through coughs and facial expressions. She also seems more hardened than her husband does. While the plight of Dr. Manette enrages Monsieur Defarge, Thérèse Defarge remains unresponsive. When Mr. Laurie and Lucy go with Monsieur Defarge to see the doctor, Madame Defarge, knitted with nimble fingers and steady eyebrows, and saw nothing. Her eerie calm and concentrated focus indicate a steadfastness and determination that may in the end prove more dangerous than the anger growing in the hearts of her husband and the populace of Saint Antoine. The man making shoes works steadily at his bench. Aged and weakened by his long years in prison, he seems to be aware only of the task at hand, shoemaking, and does not even know that he has been released from prison. When asked his name, he responds, 105 North Tower. When Lucy approaches him, however, she seems familiar to him, especially after he compares her hair to two golden hairs that he kept tied in a cloth around his neck. He begins remembering Lucy's mother and is confused and troubled when he hears Lucy's voice, which sounds like her mother's voice. Lucy embraces her father, comforting him as he begins to weep. Later, Monsieur Defarge helps Mr. Laurie and Lucy to remove Dr. Manette from the city. As the coach carrying Mr. Laurie, Lucy, and Dr. Manette rumbles to the ship that will take them back to England, Mr. Laurie can't help looking at the man they have recovered and wondering if the doctor will be able to be recalled to life. After 18 years of being physically and mentally removed from the world, the doctor has suffered greatly and appears to have lost all sense of time, place, and self. Despite the fact that he is no longer in prison, he still seems buried alive when you first see him. Both his mind and body are hidden from view. Even after some light enters the garret where he works, the doctor looks more dead than alive, with his hollow face, withered body, and a hand so thin that it looks transparent. Similarly, when Monsieur Defarge and Mr. Laurie try to talk to him, his mind seems starved and wasted to the point of being able to comprehend only the most basic questions and to focus solely on his work. Just as light enters the garret to reveal the doctor physically, contact with Lucy seems to awaken part of the doctor's mind and memories. The images of light and dark that run through A Tale of Two Cities are especially apparent in this chapter. As Dickens literally and symbolically depicts the resurrection of the doctor is drawn out of the darkness of his imprisonment and into the light of life. For instance, when for a moment the doctor seems to nearly recognize Mr. Laurie, Dickens describes his returning blankness of expression as a black mist or as darkness. Meanwhile, Lucy's face mirrors his fleeting expression of awareness as though it had passed like a moving light from him to her. When Lucy goes to sit next to her father, his attention falls on her golden hair. He shows her his wife's golden hairs that he has kept with him, and concentrating, turned her full to the light and looked at her. Later, when father and daughter embrace, his cold white head mingled with her radiant hair, which warmed and lighted it as though it were the light of freedom shining on him. The warmth and love of his daughter are strong enough to bring Dr. Manette back from the cold, colorless place his mind retreated to during his years of imprisonment. The melodramatic sentimentality of Lucy's speeches to her father somewhat spoil the poignant reunion scene between the doctor and Lucy. Weep for it, she exclaims, and modern readers struggle not to roll their eyes or laugh aloud. However, keep in mind that the Victorians greatly enjoyed this type of melodrama, and when Lucy cried out, "Weep for it," Dickens' readers wept.